Good morning to everybody. Welcome to this European Circular Economy Stakeholder Circular Talk, a new one. This Circular Talk in Critical Raw Materials is organized by the Leadership Group on Critical Raw Materials from the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform. Is organized by the EIT Circular Economy Community. We also have the European Remanufacturing Council. We have EURIC, which is the Recyclers Association. We have the European Environment Agency, and we have Poland Circular Hotspot. So my name is Ignacio Calleja. I am Senior Advisor for Circular Economy and Recycling at EIT Raw Materials, and I also lead in the EIT Circular Economy community. So I really believe that we have a very interesting webinar in front of us for the next one and a half hours. We have 6 great speakers together with us. Just to remind you that please switch off your microphone and your camera. You can send your questions through the chat, and at the end of the event, we will have a questions and answer session. I will try to organize most of your questions, because as you can understand, it's going to be really difficult to respond all of them, but I will try to do my best. So yeah, just now when we talk about Europe, we are facing many different transition processes. I hope you agree with me. We are facing the digital transition, the energy transition, the green transition, but there is a very interesting common point between all of these transition processes, which are the necessity of sustainable supply of critical raw materials. So the Commission has developed a proposal for the Critical Raw Materials Act, which in theory will be one of the most critical, one of the most relevant initiatives to ensure this sustainable supply of critical raw materials. And all together today, we will try to discuss about what are the main or the most interesting options of circularity when we talk about sustainable supply of critical raw materials. Lucas, please, can you show the next slide? Please. Okay, so we will have together with us Michael Pinter from the European Economic and Social Committee. We will have Maria Nieber from the European Commission. And then we will have 4 very interesting speakers, Cecilia Matea, telling us about the batteries and supply chain of batteries in Europe. We will also have Ricardo Bontis representing the Recyclers Vision. We will have David Peck from the European Remanufacturing Council and TU Delft. And we will also have Pascal Leroy, which is the director of the WE Forum. So if you allow me, I would like to start just now. So I would like to give the floor to Michael Pinter, European Economic and Social Committee representative. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope you can see me and hear me. First and foremost, I want to thank the organizer for bringing forward this topical subject today. As I was introduced, my name is Michael Pinter, and I'm a delegate to the Consultative Commission of Industrial Change at the European Economic and Social Committee. I suspect that many of you already know a lot about the platform as a European one-stop shop for the circular economy community, so I don't need to do further introduction. What I have to say is that as the exchange concept of the ECESP, the EUCircularTalks, in my opinion, is the ideal forum for stakeholders to come together and exchange their ideas and practices in specific fields. This is exactly why the Commission and the European Economic and Social Committee had in mind when they launched ECESP 6 years ago a platform facilitated at the European level, but driven by stakeholders on the ground. Let me say few short words about the EESC, which is a consultative body to the EU institutions, bringing together employers, workers, and NGOs as representatives of EU civil society. The EESC works actively also on issues related to circular economy, green transition, and resource use. The CCMI, or Consultative Commission on Industrial Change, which is the direct successor of the European Steel and Coal Community, functions directly under the EESC with the objective to examine and anticipate changes in industry across various sectors. As critical raw materials are crucial for success of our economic transformation, the EESC and the CCMI believe that the present and the future of CRM resilience is of essential concern to all of us. I would like to now shortly speak about the latest opinion of the EESC on Critical Raw Materials Act, which I had the pleasure to co-author. In short, the committee recommends prioritizing critical and strategic raw materials in recycling and waste legislation and supporting secondary raw materials markets, particularly for materials essential to the ecological transition. More specifically, in our opinion, the EU should support its waste treatment industry by preparing secondary raw materials for recycling in production processes. It should also amend existing waste legislation to prioritize the recycling and circularity of critical and strategic raw materials with the highest technical and economic recycling potential. Next to recycling, in our opinion, the EU should establish well-functioning markets and minimize leakage to support secondary raw materials markets, as it generally contributes to decreasing dependence on certain CRMs and to CO2 savings. For instance, I'm coming originally from the steel sector. About 630 million tons of steel scrap alone are recycled yearly, which brings savings of approximately 950 million tons of CO2 compared to virgin steel production. In the EU, more than 50% of some metals, such as iron, zinc, or platinum, are already recycled and cover a substantial part of the total EU consumption. For others, such as rare earths and some other metals, recycling only makes, however, a marginal contribution. This is where we should look for development opportunities and targeted investments. The potential clearly lies there. To further reduce reliance in primary sources, it is also essential to support exploration and extraction of projects for critical raw materials with public funding, coordinated state aid rules, and antitrust instruments in order to avoid distortions in the internal market. This approach would significantly reduce reliance in primary sources. As we all know, we are entering a new era where critical raw materials will be the new oil, as some say, will be the new geopolitical weapon, the new technological enabler. As much as we might not want to admit, this will be the new cruel reality. The low carbon world we all imagine in the future is also a mineral intensive world. So we have three transitions to achieve: the digital, the green, and the circular. Sustainable access to raw materials is key for our net zero objectives. Therefore, the EUCircularTalks is very timely to explore how EU policy can scale up improvement opportunities and bring it in the circularity aspect in critical raw material supply chains. What remains to be done is to translate the legislative ambition of the Critical Raw Materials Act into reality, and I truly believe your discussion today and also in the future can shed light on how that should be done. I look forward to this expert panel I look forward to listening to the policymakers and various experts to discuss the de-risking of the supplies of CRMs. And again, thank you for this platform.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for your words. I really appreciate your introduction. So now we move to our next speaker. And I hope Maria allows me to say that it's not only an honor, it's a pleasure to introduce Maria Nieber. Maria Nieber is a policy officer from DG GROW. And to be honest with you, I cannot imagine a best person to introduce the Critical Raw Materials Act and the circularity aspects of this Critical Raw Materials Act. So Maria, thank you for joining us today. Thank you very much. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ignacio, for the kind words, and thank you also from Mr. Pinter from the EESC comments and reactions to the Critical Raw Materials Act, which we take due account of and welcome. So I hope that you can hear and see me well, and if you can please put the first slide, thank you very much. So I would say that, so first of all, thank you for inviting me to this session, to this circular talk. I would say that if we can turn to slide number 2, please. Thank you. This topic, it's at the very top of the European policy agenda as we are moving towards the end of this mandate. And a proof of that is that our president, in the State of the Union address mid-September, made numerous references to EU raw materials policy and to the Critical Raw Materials Act. The Critical Raw Materials Act is indeed unique. It is a new piece of legislation, and it's the first time that we propose to set in EU law provisions to improve the functioning of the internal market by setting a framework to ensure the Union's access to secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials. So we proposed the 16th of March as part of the Green Deal Industrial Plan to enhance the competitiveness of Europe's net zero industry and support the fast transition to climate neutrality. So negotiations with the two co-legislators have kicked off at high speed. Trilogues are ongoing at this very moment, and we count on adoption before the European Parliament elections in June next year. Slide number 3, please. So a little bit the rationale of the CRM Act. So at the core of this regulation, because that is indeed the instrument that we have chosen, at the core we have the benchmarks that are set out in Article 1. And this benchmark, they give a clear direction of travel for our efforts on different stages of the strategic raw material value chains, so that by 2030, Union capacities for the strategic raw materials have significantly grown. So we propose to increase our recycling capacity so that it meets 15% of our annual needs for strategic raw materials. And we also have benchmarks for mining in the EU and for processing and for diversification of imports. I want to add that we have looked into how achieving our green and digital objectives can be combined with the highest resource efficiency and possibly changed behavioral consumption patterns. And we did this in our foresight analysis, which is also part of the CRM Act. You find this in a list of links that are included in the slides that you will receive. And our assessment in the foresight analysis shows that this is a adjusted to new behavioral consumption patterns. It's a real possibility in example e-mobility, but it is less evident in the case of the massive scaling up of renewable energy that we foresee. Slide number 4, please. So the CRM Act addresses strengthening all stages of the European CRM value chains. And the idea is that strategic projects, a core instrument of the proposal, will be identified that produce strategic raw materials and contribute to reaching the benchmarks. And these strategic projects can be carried out in the EU and in third countries. They need to meet the criteria that are set out in Article 5, and this includes fulfilling sustainability requirements. It is indeed so that sustainability and circularity is a main pillar all through the proposal. I already said that the strategic projects need to demonstrate their sustainability. It is part of the criteria. So here they need to address the potential environmental risk. They need to show that they are using socially responsible and transparent business practices. Sustainability certification schemes may be recognized for this purpose. This you find in Annex 4. And compliance with listed sustainability EU legislation and international instruments are to be found in Annex 3. We have an empowerment to set at a later stage information requirements on the environmental footprint of CRMs placed on the EU market. Slide number 5, please. So on circularity, we are pulling together different areas in national competence for increasing the recovery of CRM from products, components, and waste streams with high potential. And we are asking member states to come forward with national programs for this purpose. This is included in Article 25. We specifically target the extractive waste stream, and this is because this is the most important waste stream together with construction waste in terms of volume. And recent analysis show that there is a potential for recovering CRM from this stream. And we also have important industrial projects showing the possibility for doing this and for attracting investments for this activity. In Article 26, we ask operators to assess the potential recovery of CRMs in active, extractive waste sites, and member states to do the same for closed extractive waste sites, and to increase knowledge and information about the CRM potentially recoverable from this waste stream. This follows a staged approach, both in terms of requirements and timing. We zoom in on permanent magnets that include rare earths. Because we are so highly dependent on imports of rare earths in permanent magnets from a very limited number of supplier countries, we are proposing measures to increase their recyclability at the time they will reach end of life. So this includes information and labeling requirements for permanent magnets containing products, and this would happen 3 years after entry into force of the regulation. There is also information on the share of recycled content as per the same timing, 3 years after entry into force. And by 2030, we have the possibility to come up with rules for a minimum recycled content target for neodymium, dysprosium, praseodymium, and other rare earths, nickel and cobalt, that need to be taken into account in a permanent magnet placed on the EU market. We also need to take into account measures in sectoral legislation. The batteries regulation that entered into force in August is the first EU-level regulatory initiative with provisions for higher recycling efficiencies and mandatory recycled content of cobalt, lithium, nickel, and lead. This regulation really sets an example. The more recent regulation proposal for a regulation of end-of-life vehicles that we came up with in July also serves to increase CRM recovery from end-of-life vehicles by developing specific requirements on the design for dismantling, removability, and recycling of CRM-relevant parts and components from vehicles. Last week, the Commission adopted a set of policy recommendations for member states to improve and incentivize the return of used waste, mobile phones, tablets, laptops, and their chargers. So these small electronic devices are rich in CRM. And one smartphone alone contains rare earths in the magnet, cobalt in the battery, indium in the screen, and tantalum, gallium, and precious metals in the printed circuit board. The forthcoming review of the WE directive will consider measures for information requirements and recovery targets to promote recovery of CRM from these waste streams. Next year, we will look into the possible inclusion of waste codes for lithium-ion batteries and intermediate waste streams, black mass, under the European list of waste to ensure their proper recycling within the EU. That's not all. As part of the implementation of the EU legislation on eco-design, the ESPR, the Sustainable Products Regulation, we are looking into the possibility of setting performance and information requirements in new products and equipment, which will promote the substitution of CRM and make sure that they can be dismantled and reused or recycled. Slide number 6, please. Thank you. The extensive measures that we have put on the table to increase the recycling of CRM in the CRM Act and in sectoral legislative initiatives will enable us to meet the 15% benchmark by 2030. The European Critical Raw Materials Board that will be set up will continuously assess and follow up progress on this matter and take necessary action to ensure the fulfillment of the objective. So what will success look like? We aim at, and we see a real potential for, that in 10 years' time, we have a strong nascent raw materials recycling industry in Europe to recover what we can from waste, next to a strong socially and environmentally standard-setting extraction and processing industry to make full use of natural resources where recycling is not yet enough. Already now, we see and hear increased attention around raw materials in Europe. Projects that are being developed according to high environmental and social standards. One example is the production of high-purity manganese from tailings in Svaletice in Czech Republic by the Euromanganese company. With our act, we want to reinforce this development and fast-track its path towards delivery of a sustainable, resilient supply of primary and secondary raw materials to increase Europe's capacities for green, digital, space and defense applications in close cooperations with our like-minded partners. So I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you here today who I know have contributed to the proposal through your knowledge and through your involvement. And I hope that you will have good exchanges for the duration of this circular talk. And a final thing on slide 7, please. I want to finish by reminding of that Raw Materials Week is happening in Brussels, 13th to 17th of November. Registrations are open and the CRM Act will be in focus of this week, and with a whole day dedicated to sustainable raw materials value chains, including higher circularity. Thank you very much for your attention, and this is what I wanted to say to you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you very much. If you allow me, I would like to make a direct question to you. And this is a question I have shared with many people. Because you show in one of your slides, you saw an objective of 50% of supply of strategic raw materials coming from the recycling, right?
Yes.
What this means? This means that we will try to get minimum 50% recycling for each strategic raw materials, or it would be the total amount of total strategic raw materials in Europe of 50%?
So you see that all the benchmarks, they relate to, first of all, it is not a threshold, but it is a benchmark towards which we are striving. And it is not a legally binding benchmark, okay? But we want to send a strong signal that this is where we want to reach. And for the various benchmarks, we talk about the share of EU strategic raw materials consumption by 2030. We do not talk about the individual strategic raw materials consumption. But okay, so this should be interpreted in a way that we really want to make considerable improvement in the share of recycled critical raw materials that goes back into production. Now we know that the recycling, the end-of-life recycling input rate of copper today is 55%. So if we want to play it to have a relaxed approach, we could use this. And then we could just sum it all up to compensate for that lithium and rare earths are basically at 0% of recycling that goes back into production at an industrial scale. And this is, of course, not the purpose. We want to make considerable improvement for the various strategic materials that are listed in the annex.
Okay, clear. Thank you very much, Maria.
My pleasure.
Okay, so we now move to the next speaker. And now I would like to invite Cecilia Matea, who is working at Transport and Environment, and she will tell us about the batteries value chains and critical raw materials. Thank you, Cecilia. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much, Ignacio. I trust you can see my screen okay. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, I'm Cecilia Matea. I work for a green NGO called Transport and Environment. So a quick word perhaps about TNE. We are a green environmental NGO, membership based. So, and we've been working for decades now on decarbonizing transport across different modes. So cars, trucks, shipping, aviation. But the end goal is really to use regulation, to shift the market. We've been working for a few years now on cars and electrification. And of course, a key question comes to mind as to we need the raw materials to electrify and to decarbonize our, Europe's car fleet. However, how can we do it sustainably? As TNE, we really welcomed the Commission's Critical Raw Materials Act and the progress made in negotiations so far. So a quick first introductory remark from us, perhaps. What we see is that Europe is really catching up on battery production. So you can see here basically a snapshot of the planned or currently already in production gigafactories in Europe. And when I say Europe has been catching up, because as many of you I'm sure are familiar, today the majority of batteries that go into, be it electric vehicles or phones, are really produced outside of Europe. What we really welcomed from the Commission's proposal is this focus not just on extraction, but also on processing and recycling. So first I'll cover processing a little bit. We see that the processing is really the missing link, which is why, it's great that the Commission and focus there, and we really welcome also the increased ambition from the Parliament in the negotiations. So you can see that, processing is really locked into China today, the processing of key raw material, whereas the extraction is a little bit more varied in terms of country of origin, but processing, it's really in China. And this is an area that we see that should be a focus of priority for Europe, so bringing metals processing to the European region. So we've done some analysis based on the battery market, and then in the case of lithium, if we look at the top 5 lithium projects already planned in Europe around processing. So, for example, a notable one is the one, it's the joint venture between Northvolt and Galp in Portugal called Aurora. And we can see that in the ramp up to 2030, we can actually overshoot the target set out in the Critical Raw Materials Act for battery raw materials. And we've done this analysis not just on lithium, but also on nickel and cobalt, and you can find the numbers on our website. For recycling, it's a similar story that we can really reach the targets, hit the targets set out by the Commission by 2030 for battery raw materials. But what is missing, and I'll come back to this, it's really the material recovery plants. Yeah, and as I said, I'll come back to this in a couple of slides. So the Critical Raw Materials Act, as we see it, rightly focuses on processing and sustainable supply via the strategic projects, notably. It really attempts to guarantee social and environmental standards, as Maria mentioned, not just in Europe, but also outside of Europe. However, what is lacking and what we need to really unlock the potential of the Critical Raw Materials Act is funding on the table, really as a response to the US IRA and, the investments that China is really rolling out via a Critical Metals Processing Fund. So, as I said, the CRM Act is really about sustainable and responsible supply. So what should it do? So we see that the EU, in terms of recycling and secondary materials, should really prioritize integrated recyclers. So those that really are focusing on vertical integration as strategic projects. This is key as it will also reduce costs and it will give a competitive advantage, and it will also really lock in the skills that Europe needs for processing, but also for recycling. And then we really need more R&D investments into material recovery in Europe. And I'm sure that the speakers after me will cover this point much better than I can. Specific about this, I want to bring to the attention of the audience a joint ask coming from industry and NGOs on black mass. We sent a letter a few weeks ago to the Commission, really highlighting this issue. So we would like to see black mass, as the production scrap, basically from batteries, included in waste codes and intermediate waste streams under the European list of waste as soon as possible. This is to really lock in this material in Europe. So if we designate those intermediate waste streams as hazardous waste by the end of 2023 for the purpose of their export outside of the EU, what we can really do is ensure that also those investments in Europe around processing and recycling are really there instead of losing precious raw materials to Asia. And then what we would also need is a technical study, so a mandate for the JRC to carry out a study to assess what conditions black mass, under what conditions black mass has a waste or an end of waste status, and really clarify the rules around this. So this was a request sent jointly by Transport and Environment, WWF, Recharge, which is one of the industry associations for lithium-ion batteries, and Eurometaux, which is the European Association of Metals. So it's really something that we see that both industry and NGOs can advocate for together. And then one final point from me on the whole CRMA debate that I think it's important to bring to the table, although perhaps a little bit less relevant to this group, but it's around certification schemes and the role that they play under the Act. So we believe that they can play an important role. However, we need to keep in mind that not all certification schemes are created or managed equally, which is why we welcome the proposal of the European Parliament to strengthen the criteria around this. However, we mustn't forget that certification schemes are a data point, something that can provide information about not just the mine site, but also a refining plant, a recycling plant, to really understand, okay, is it, it's a snapshot at a given point in time. For this reason, we really believe that it should support compliance, but not attest compliance against international and national law, especially, if we think about, in Europe, we're really asking our companies to comply with all these laws, and then outside of Europe, the compliance with the certification scheme, well, that's not really a level playing field as we see it. A final word on the global dimension, and I'll come back to the funding point made earlier. This is just a snapshot of that between 2020 and 2023, China invested $12 billion in lithium, nickel, and cobalt operations. So ours is really a call for the European Union to put really, you know, to put funding on the table to really ensure that we have strong and resilient critical raw material value chains in Europe. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Really interesting presentation. We will have our questions and answers session later, but just now I would like to make a question for you. I would like to launch a question to you. You know, when we talk about circular economy, we have different options, or we have different strategies in circular economy. We have reuse, repairing, remanufacturing, recycling. So when we talk about batteries, do you see any conflict or any potential problem between all these different options? Because just now we have a lot of initiatives going to build big plans for batteries recycling in Europe, but at the same time there is also a very interesting option, which is batteries reuse. Mm-hmm. So do you see any potential conflict, or do you see that do you think that these different options will work perfectly together? Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Ignacio. Thank you. I think, you know, TNE's approach to this is to also, you know, we need to incentivize the longevity of the batteries and their repairability. That is key before even talking about reuse. Where the chemistry allows it, by all means, reuse must be a priority. So, for example, notably in energy storage purposes, right? For, you know, grid stability, etc. However, we need to recognize that not all chemistries, not all battery types, not all battery chemistries may be fit for this purpose, which is why we need recycling plants in Europe as soon as possible to really welcome in the spent batteries that we'll see come in towards the end of this decade.
Okay, thank you very much. So sorry, please, for the participants, keep the microphones disconnected. Thank you. Thank you, Cecilia. So we now move to the next speaker, and at the time I would like to invite Ricardo Bontis, which is technical advisor of EURIC. EURIC is the European Association of Recyclers, so I think very relevant point of view to be considered within this webinar. So Ricardo, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I will share my presentation. Just let me know if you can see it.
If you can go to the full screen.
Yes.
Perfect. Now it's perfect. Thank you.
So again, thank you very much for the kind introduction and for inviting me here to share the views of European recyclers. So basically, just to briefly introduce EURIC, we represent European recyclers in front of European institutions, being them the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the Council, but also in some standardization committees like CENELEC. And at an international level, we also participate in discussions at the Stockholm and Basel level, and of course at OECD. Now, in terms of our members are national recycling federations. As you can see on the screen, we are in 23 EU and EFTA member states. And through our members, we represent more than 5,500 companies. We provide indirectly, of course, more than 300,000 jobs, and we have an annual turnover of 95 billion euro. Now, in terms of the streams we cover, these are metals, both ferrous and non-ferrous, plastics, paper, textiles, tires, end-of-life vehicles, electrical and electronic equipment, and recently we launched a new branch on construction and demolition because of the increasing work that, the increasing files that we see coming from the European Commission. Now, going to today's discussion on timely discussion, I would say, on the proposal on critical raw materials. Also, the recycling industry strongly welcomed the proposal because actually we saw a huge need of the different articles and the different chapters included in the proposal. And if I can dive a little bit deeper on what has already been presented by Maria earlier on. Now, what we strongly welcomed, because I cannot go through the whole proposal, but I would like to highlight a few points, is that basically we saw that the European Commission is proposing to become more independent in terms of imports of critical raw materials from third countries. Now, a certain percentage, the second point is that we also welcome that a certain percentage has to come from the European recycling industry. However, here, although if it's not mandatory, we would like to ask to not overshoot, because as it was pointed out earlier on, for some materials the recovery is quite high, for example copper, but for some other materials, so basically it's quite low. So basically we see that these targets can be better introduced in different specific product legislation. Another point that is it's extremely important for us is also about European projects, and actually we strongly welcomed the fact that the European Commission has introduced articles to speed up the permit granting process. Point number 4 is to improve collection. Actually, also this is extremely important, because at the end of the day, the more proper collection you have at the end of life, more materials will be directed to authorized treatment facilities, and in that way they will be able to be reinjected into the market in the form of new products. Last but not least, we were actually also extremely happy to see new recycled content targets for permanent magnets, but on this point I would like to stress it a little bit more in my next slide. Now, if we go to the recently adopted position of the European Parliament, here we saw that the European Parliament has taken a step forward, so basically has proposed, has gone a little bit more into detail. The first point is that we were extremely happy again about that, is that about the increased transparency when updating both lists, the list of strategic raw material and critical raw materials, because we believe that there is a need to have more transparency when either adding or removing materials. Now, in terms of European projects, also here we saw that it has been taken a step forward. So basically, priority should be given according to the European Parliament's report on projects in the area of recovery, extractive waste, and integrated recycling. Now, we also see a strong push, not only by the European Parliament, but also by the European Commission, and we hope also from the Council during the trilogue negotiations, to increase the use of secondary critical raw materials. And last but not least, the point on recycled content targets. Here we see that the work, the timeline has been advanced. So basically, the European Parliament is proposing the work to start no later than December 2030, whereas the European Commission is proposing that it may start after December 2030. Actually, this is a very important point, because in order to close the loop of critical raw materials, we have to have a demand at the end of the recycling process. Now, of course, there are some points that we didn't agree with. So basically, we saw some materials that either stayed in the list or were added. So basically, I can already say that one of these materials didn't tick all the boxes that are required in order to be added to the CRM list. But I would particularly like to focus on the second point on this about the creation, the last minute addition basically of the European Parliament to add a list of strategic secondary raw materials. So basically here we had discussions with different stakeholders, and including us, we don't understand the reasoning behind this proposal. We don't see if, we cannot understand if there is an added value. And what we are afraid is that there is a risk of dilutions, because at the end of the day, we already have two lists. We understood that the necessity to add a second list of strategic raw materials, it was again welcome that. but adding more and more lists, we don't see the purpose. Especially, I would like to focus on the fact that the European Parliament is proposing to add ferrous scrap. And here, again, we don't understand the reason, because ferrous scrap actually is one of the most abundant material in the European Union. So basically, if we take into consideration the numbers that we have from 2022, we know that we have an apparent domestic supply of approximately 93 million tons. And if we take into consideration also the crude steel production that is around 135 million tons, we can see that we have plenty of ferrous scrap in the European Union. Now, something that I believe it's important to highlight, and it was also mentioned by Maria at the beginning of the webinar, is that the CRM Act will be linked with several pieces of legislation. And actually, here I would like to make the link about recycled content targets and collection targets, but also other ambitious targets that are set in this proposal. That basically it will be very important also to see this target in several pieces of legislation, like, for example, the ESPR, that now the European Commission is doing the work on the different product priorities, the battery regulation that was presented earlier on, and the ELV proposal that, again, it was recently published by the European Commission. Now, if we can take an example, again, I will say what the previous presenters have said. An excellent example is the regulation on batteries and waste batteries, and here I would like to focus on 2 points. So basically, the first is about recycled content targets. Also, what I mentioned earlier on, that we believe they have to be introduced in different product-specific legislation. And here we can, as I said, we can take the example of the battery regulation that is introducing recycled content targets for industrial, SLI, and electric vehicle batteries. And the percentages are 16% for cobalt, 85% for lead, and 6% for lithium and nickel. Something extremely important is about the removability of components containing critical raw materials. And here I would like to link it with the eco-design requirements, because at the end of the day, the more eco-design requirements we have in European legislation, the easier it will be for European recyclers to extract critical raw materials at the end of life. So basically, again, an example that I would like to give from the proposal on batteries and waste batteries is that this proposal provides that by 2027, portable batteries incorporated into appliances should be removable and replaceable by end user. Now, this is, I believe, is my last slide. Here, I would like to point out that the most significant barrier for European recyclers is the profitability, because actually the technology to recover critical raw materials already exists today. It's not like we don't have the technology. So basically, in order to overcome the barriers that we have in terms of profitability, again, I would like to stress some points. Again, the most important one, actually, of the most important is to have binding recycled content targets in different product-specific legislation, like, for example, end of life, the proposal on vehicles, the ESPR, and so on and so forth. Point number 2 is to support in the form of eco-modulation in EPR fees. The third point is we would like to see more tax breaks for products that have been manufactured with a high content of recycled materials. And here, for example, we can take an excellent example is what the Czech Republic is doing, that the products that they have a high level of recycled content have a lower VAT. We see the point on EU funding opportunities honestly going to the right direction, and we would also like this point to continue during the trilogue negotiations. And finally, we need a well-functioning EU, but also international market for recycled raw materials. Thank you very much, and I will be more than happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Very interesting presentation. Thank you for the data. I have a specific question for you just now. So I like in your last presentation, in your last slide, you have a specific reference to market support measures for recycling products, because at the end, for example, when we check Commission support, for example, for research and innovation in recycling processes. I think from the last framework programs, FP6, 7, Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe, the reality is we have had many topics going to support this research and innovation initiatives in Europe to the development of new technologies. But personally, I see that we could maybe need more market support measures to increase the uptaking of these recycling materials in the market. And one of the issues is a potential temporary tax reduction for these recycling materials. How do you see this option? I think, do we really need more market support measures for these recycling materials, or yeah?
Yes, I can only echo what I said during the presentation of my last slide. So basically, by introducing more market support measures, this will support, will first and foremost close the loop of raw materials, and in that particular case of critical raw materials. But also this will help European recyclers, because if you have a market, and sufficient demand at the end of the recycling process, that will allow the recyclers to have stability first and foremost, to further invest and scale up recycling capacities. That basically this will support as a consequence, the targets of the European Green Deal, the targets of the Circular Economy Action Plan. So basically, as you can see, it's a chain of events that will happen, that we see that, the first starting point, actually not the first, a very good starting point, would be more measures to support the uptake of secondary raw materials. Okay,
thank you very much, Ricardo. So, okay, perfect. We now move to our next speaker. And in this case, I would like to introduce a very well-known person in this European ecosystem, who is Pascal Leroy. Pascal is the director of the WE Forum, and I really believe that he will tell us a lot of interesting issues regarding critical raw materials and electronics. Thank you, Pascal. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ignacio, for your introduction and your kind comments. I'd like to say that international research shows that globally, almost 75% million tons of e-waste is expected to arise yearly by the year 2030. And the e-waste growth rate is 3.3%. So it's one of the fastest growth rates, waste growth rates. And the WE Forum, which is an international not-for-profit association speaking for 52 producer responsibility organizations. All of them are legal entities mandated by producers to responsibly manage the collection and treatment of electrical waste. And they have operations on all continents. So they are the organizations that collect and manage the treatment of electrical and electronic waste on behalf of the producers community. And so just a few words about the nature and scale of the e-waste problem. I just mentioned the 70.7 million tons by 2030. But the thing is that this is a continuous, it continues to grow, this waste stream. Secondly, lots of products are hoarded in the households, and this is really a big problem, because any material that is sitting in a smartphone in a cupboard needs to be mined instead, because it's not available. So these materials are not available for recycling because they are sitting in products. And that's the reason also why every year, actually, next E-Waste Day, International E-Waste Day, is this Saturday, the 14th of October, to draw attention to this issue and to call on everyone to return end-of-life or broken or unused appliances and products. For example, I give here the example of 113 million unused phones sleep in drawers in France. That's just France. And I read in the Commission recommendation that it concerns 700,000 for the European Union. 700 million. And so that's an issue of great concern. Many of these products, and Maria Newberg already mentioned it, that many of these smaller appliances, smartphones, but also tablets and so on, they contain the critical raw materials that the European economy needs. And exactly, so the third element is that the smartphone contains almost all the elements of the Mendeleev table, and the materials that are not recycled or not recovered must be mined instead. And mining is a much more ecologically damaging activity, as we all know. Of course, it's not just all about recycling. It's also about making sure that products circulate in the economy, that they are repaired and that they are reintroduced as refurbished or remanufactured products. And as some of the previous speakers have indicated, we can be, or waste electronic equipment, or e-waste, can be a strategic lever. Of course, we will continue to need mining. However, the end-of-life products, so we can be a strategic lever in the sense that they already contain many of the critical raw materials that we're looking after. And so Maria mentioned the 15% benchmark, but in order to get there, we need a regulation, so which is the CRM Act. We need awareness, and this is one of the reasons why we do International E-Waste Day, because as long as products are not returned for collection, we are not making much progress. Volume means also that we may want to restructure the way we collect appliances so as to have more concentration of critical raw materials in the product. So what I mean is that we have a certain way of collecting appliances, but if you really want to recover certain materials, certain critical raw materials sitting in these products, we may want to reconsider the way we collect them, create new categories of waste products. That's very important, because we are talking about very, very tiny volumes of critical raw materials. And so therefore, there's just a space for 1 or 2, maybe 3 plants in Europe to recover these materials. Yttrium, for example, from phosphorus powder in lamps is one example. And then capacity, I already mentioned. There is still a scope to broaden the capacity, and I was interested to hear Cecilia Mattea say that there should be a priority to integrated recyclers. That's an interesting thought. And last but not least, of course, there's manufacturing. So if you only recover materials in order to, let's say, introduce them into the production process. I was at the conference in Barcelona last week, and one of the recyclers told us that he is actually recovering tantalum, but no one is buying his recovered tantalum, and he has to sell it to Chinese companies. Of course, this is not progress. I mean, if we can't sell the recovered materials, we are not making lots of progress. So we need additional legislation or initiatives or programs to make sure that companies onshore again, so they come back to European Union for manufacturing. And I just list here a few elements that are sitting in the CRM regulation and related to circularity and what they mean for the waste sector. So first of all, member states will have to report CRM in products and components. And we can help with this because we have already a tool. It's called the REP tool. The CRM recovery potential, that will be in a delegated act. The project that called Future RAM, Future Availability of Raw Materials, is a project that started 1 year ago. And that's one of the elements that we are working on, so the recovery potential. And then one element that has not been mentioned by any of the previous speakers is information through unique product identifier. This is mentioned in the CRM Act, but it's also sitting in the battery regulation. So we will expect digital product passports to indicate also where to find the critical raw materials in which components, which parts of the products. And then, of course, we will need to know the volume of products containing CRM placed on the market and collected. Then we will also need to design economic instruments, and I take the opportunity to mention ECOSWE, which is a project started a bit earlier this year, which the WE Forum is leading on, and is looking into the role of monetary rewards, discounts, deposit return systems, etc. My previous speaker, Ricardo, mentioned the tax breaks. So what are the economic instruments that can incentivize or that can nudge people to return their electrical and electronic products. Then quality standards and certification. I'm happy that Cecilia Mattia mentioned this, that of course not any certification scheme would qualify, but we did a project funded by Horizon Europe a couple of years ago. It's called Sea Waste, and it laid down a set of standards regarding CRM products, but also a voluntary certification scheme. So I advise all policymakers and decision makers to have a look at sea waste to see to what extent they can be useful in this CRM regulation. Of course, this project was run before we had the invasion of Ukraine and so on, but nevertheless, the work has been done. Deliverables are just there to be tapped into. And that's an overview, and then consideration in terms of EPR legislation. So one of the things that Maria Neuberg mentioned is that the WEEE legislation is currently subject of evaluation, and in a couple of years' time there will be a proposal. Likely there will be a proposal, it's not certain, to revise the directive, and it could be a new directive or a new regulation. And here on this slide, I will not walk through all of them. We will we draw attention, let's say, to the things that need to be considered. And one of the things is, for example, that the minimum collection rates need to be redesigned. And it's also a question of aligning supply and demand for recycled materials. Also the standards, someone mentioned it in one of the previous presentations. So we currently have standards for the related to the handling and the transport and the treatment of electronic waste, but we need specific CRM European standards. And I think it suffices that we request a standardization with Stenelec, for example. And then consider the role of the consumer. This was mentioned previously, but it actually means that the consumer is really the actor in the ecosystem that is very important, as I said. So it's very often households that hoard the appliances. So there's a lot of improvement in that respect. So I will leave it at that, and I'm looking forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Pascal. As always, very interesting presentation from your side. Yes, one direct question from my side at this moment. You already told us about the importance of the consumers in these value chains, because at the end, the consumer is going to be the first step in the whole value chain. If we have a problem with the first step, the whole value chain will fail. So for me, it would be really interesting to know from your side, what are the main, or what could be the most efficient awareness campaigns or awareness initiatives to convince consumers that they should return smartphones, tablets, toys to this value chain. Because to be honest with you, I know so many people with smartphones at home or with tablets or with computers not returning to the value chain is amazing. I don't know, what is your opinion about this?
Well, so as I said, ECOSWE is a live project that will look into specifically this element, this issue of how can we get consumers to return their end-of-life products. And we started last year, and we're really looking to a number of initiatives, so monetary rewards, discounts, VAT breaks or tax breaks, and so forth, and all these or deposit return schemes for products with a very small time scale. And for all these initiatives, we are going to design pilots and operational pilots and test them, and then statistically map the effectiveness of each of these incentives. In my opinion, we have there's a lot of European Union money going towards recycling technologies and creating a knowledge base. But in my opinion, the role of the consumer and how we can incentivize him and her to return the products, this is an area that is insufficiently researched, and I would hope that there's more money going in that direction.
Thank you very much, Pascal. So we now move We now move to our last speaker. Last but not least, I would like to introduce a very well-known person in the circular economy field in Europe. I think that everybody knows David Peck. So sorry, David, but I think you don't need any introduction. The floor is yours.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
I'm very happy. Can you hear me okay? I'm in a very echoey room. It's a very empty room, but it's fine. I'm just going to put some slides up, and here we go. I won't be long because actually a lot of people have covered a lot of the ground already, which is a really nice experience. Normally, I have to spend a while explaining everything about the Critical Raw Materials Act and everything what a critical materials is. And actually, interestingly enough, today I'm in Ireland and I'm going to be I've been doing that all week, and I'm going to be doing it in a little while again. But this is a super audience and super colleagues, and thank you, Pascal, as well. It's lovely to see you again. A quick, obviously, Festival of Logos, I'm sorry, but this is super funders, especially EIT Raw Materials, where I should also declare interest. I sit on the executive board, but I also, of course, are involved in super projects. And I also push on the subject of critical materials. If anyone in the audience thinks, I want to learn more, where can I go today to learn more about critical materials? Go to Suscrit Mat online, find it, have a look, find the massive open online course on critical materials on edX, and it's running live now and it's free, and you can learn everything there. And thank you to EIT Raw Materials for supporting that. I'm going to jump straight in and I'm going to cut through some of my slides, but the first one I want to pause on for a moment. And I often ask audiences, I'm not doing it today because we're less live, but I ask audiences, what is this flag? And I've yet to find an audience that can answer this question straight away. Of course, here you see it, what it is. We're back to 1952, rebuilding Europe after the devastation of World War II. And what did we look at first in order to create not only a future, but also to make war unimaginable, unthinkable, as was said? We looked at coal and steel. What are we really looking at here? Energy and materials, especially metals, because those two constituents are interlinked, two sides of the same coin. No energy, no metals, no metals, no energy. And that is the fundamentals of Europe. And that's why I'm so proud to work with EIT Raw Materials, because they are that core of what we're talking about in the future of Europe and the future of the world. And I always mention that. The other side of the slide here is my PhD on critical materials and circular design, which is my expertise. Going forwards, oops, sorry. We've hit the holy cow moment, or for those who are happy with it, the oh shit moment. What we tend to think about, this is from my colleague René Klein in Leiden University, what we tend to think about is how the human mind thinks is up the blue line. We think we introduce the technology, it can be a new material, it can be a new technology for low carbon transition, and we think it's going to diffuse out up the blue line. Everything's going to happen in nice project managed steps, and everybody's going to accept the new situation as you go up. That is not what normally happens. What normally happens is we go along the green line, where for years nothing happens, and then it goes whoosh. Now, I think of my dear colleague Pascal, of course, and I think of all the years that we've been on Horizon projects and even FP7 before that on critical materials, where nobody was listening to what we're talking about, and now we just sit here and shake our heads and go, the whole world is going crazy. So I think we've gone up the green line and we've hit the holy cow moment where suddenly everyone is talking about critical materials. So I think this is a really useful analogy on what we're experiencing. I'm not going to dwell on this because this has probably been covered very well by colleagues already. Just to, again, reiterate, I'm not putting the whole thing on here because I'm not showing the strategic materials, which brings in the copper and the nickel and so on and so forth, and the aluminium, since the EU Parliament and Council recently voted. And again, here it is mapped out. I'm not going to dwell on this. Plotted onto the periodic table of elements, I do just point out we've sort of got to the first half of the first 83 elements. We generally, the industrial economy uses sort of like the first 83 odd elements. and we kind of got to half. So the idea that, when we started this journey decades ago, it was kind of like a minority of metals. Now it's you could even say we're getting close to moving into the majority are critical, at least in terms of numbers of elements, not in terms of volumes, of course. And again, the supply chain, and here we see country concentration. The issue around China and Russia, of course, is driving the geopolitical dimension on the policy actions that we're seeing in Europe. Recycling rates again, and this is, I know, as you say, I say short-term recycling is challenging, but I'm with Pascal on this. Recycling is essential, and we must ramp it up and find better ways of doing it. But short-term, it doesn't offer us a short-term supply-demand fix, which leads me to talk again. We see this with the recycling rates and the primary mining, of course, which is another side of the work that I look at with the EOT raw materials. The processing, and these are the new numbers that have just come out from the European Parliament that we think we're going to see. And by the way, if anyone's wondering when is this going to land in the member states, my latest information is unconfirmed and we don't know, but you could be seeing this in the member state as law late February, early March next year. It could even be earlier. So it's going through at pace and at speed. It has been voted through Parliament. So this is coming. So this isn't a discussion topic anymore. It's freezing up as the numbers as we see them. I don't think they're going to change anymore, and this is what will be in the regulations. I just wanted to touch on one area, and I don't think I'm not sure any speakers have talked about this already, but the interrelationship with eco-design. So the JRC colleagues have been looking at this, and this is really interesting for me. And I think this is really important for a lot of companies. CRMs are not in the odd material box for a small number of players who are involved in this field. CRMs are everywhere, and they involve all manufacturing activities, regardless of the primary materials they're dealing with. And once we move into change in design, everything changes. And I think this is valuable work by the JRC. And what they're looking at is you start to look at the CRM lists, you understand which CRMs you're using, you cross that over to your bill of materials, or in the case of the built environment, the BIM instead of the BOM, same idea. And then you need to declare quantity. And this is the bit that really interests me. You need to extend lifetime. That is the bit I'm really interested in. Of course, in the end, recyclability and the recycled content, but first step, extend lifetime. And that's the bit I'm going to talk a little bit about today. The second part, or the second act of the two-part act, is the Net Zero Industry Act, which again, I've noticed has been a little bit off the radar. Everybody's very focused on the CRMA. I think this one is equally important, if not in terms of our transition as important, because the materials are needed, for example, these technologies. And the CRMA, at least in its draft form, proposes 40% of this technology made in Europe by 2030. Sorry, the made in Ireland is because I'm in Ireland right now. I could write made in Netherlands when I get back to the Netherlands, made in Italy when I'm in Italy the week after. I'm in Spain next week, so I can put Spain. So, as we go around Europe, we can start to say every country is going to have these types of targets. Now I want to talk a little bit about critical materials in a circular built environment. And in Delft, we've developed up the Circular Built Environment Hub. And this is a model of what we've been looking at. So we start with materials, which is good news for this audience, of course. But then we talk about components, buildings, neighborhoods, cities, and regions. And then round the outside, we talk about management, technology, design, resource flows, stakeholders, and economy. And then you see on the right-hand side, the model that was just running a moment ago. There it is. I've got it going again now, where it's looking around at those management, design, and so on and so forth, and clicking down through the materials, components, buildings, and then you can't read it, but there are lots and lots and lots of dimensions that we need to look at. This took us about a year to develop this model. It's a lot of work behind this. And this is how we're thinking about this domain. What I am noticing is that critical raw materials in buildings is being missed in the conversation, which, or even, I have to admit, rejected. No, this is about digital transition. It's about low carbon energy generation. It's about electric mobility. I'm not interested in buildings, which puzzles me deeply, because if you then ask a different question, where is the highest material demand? It's a really simple answer. Smartphones are quite small. Electric cars are a little bit bigger. Buildings are enormous. And I'll show you an example of this in a moment. This is my first sort of rough scope with some colleagues around different technologies and where they're in buildings. The other thing that people misunderstand about buildings, they go, they're not really interested because they last for hundreds of years. They go, no, you need to understand what's called the Brunt shearing layer model, which is in the middle, and stuff and space and services, they go through quite quickly. So they go through faster. So they don't last the entire life of the building. We tend to refurbish and refurbish and repair things in buildings, and they get changed, especially things like digital technologies and building services, but also fundamental things like the construction of the building. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a moment. So these things are being missed. And that's something I'm trying to push hard, because these sectors and manufacturers need to move too. And again, I stress it's also about digital. So, you know, it involves the work we just heard Pascal talking about too. Just moving forwards. Sorry, I've jumped. Here we go. Here's an example of a building in Rotterdam. And here you see, we're just looking, this is a researcher of mine. She's just been looking at a facade. This is quite a well-known building in Rotterdam, the Rotterdam. And what they've looked at here, my colleague has looked at, is the materials used in just the facade. So it's just the skin of the building. And then she's done an assessment on this one building and come up with the new CRM list of this year with nearly 184 tons of critical materials in just the skin. And this is replicated in city after city, in building after building after building. And people get very excited about the milligrams in a phone. And I'm going, there are hundreds of tons in buildings, and we're not looking at it and we're not understanding it. So, and facade tends to get replaced a lot quicker. She's also looked with the CRMA at printed circuit board, and particularly the motors. And we're looking, this is again, all in the building and in the facade. So it comes as a surprise to people, like motors in facades. And I go, yes, the windows that automatically open and close, or the blinds and shutters that automatically go up and down. Yeah, this is what we're looking at. Environmental sensor, magnet and motor. And then suddenly you get back to these long lists of elements. And this is what my researcher has been looking at. Again, the volumes are astronomical. So for example, some of these components in a building that you just looked at, we're in 30, 40, 50,000 components. It is on a grand scale in one building. They are very big. So coming over, what we want is much more on remanufacturing. And you see me bringing in, this is work from colleagues in France, in Grenoble. Yep, I'm there. And there you see we're talking about, let's move to remanufacturing of these components, where we close the loop, bring them back from end of life, back into manufacturing as good as or better than new. And there we really love the support of our colleagues in the European Remanufacturing Council, who again I will be seeing this week. And that this provides us in the built environment, in automotive, in marine, in aerospace, with the regulatory standard we need for safe components in buildings. Other product life extension strategies can't do it. You can't put repaired stuff in buildings. You can remat. Finally, I'm going to finish Industry 4.0. We need much more information together with the remanufacturing activity, again, with the critical materials. And we just heard about digital product passport and things like that. Absolutely essential. Let's bring it all together. And that is me finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Very interesting, as always. Yes, quick question for you at this point. I think when we talk recyclability, I always think that the design of the products is an absolutely key issue. Because, for example, we are talking about the quantity of valuable materials included in a smartphone just now. But considering the complexity and considering so small quantities of these materials in these smartphones, do you think that this complexity of the products could hamper the recyclability potential of products? Should we go in a more less complexity design of products in the future?
Indeed, and again, coming back to the built environment, we're beginning to talk about passive buildings that are much more low tech, but it gets hard when we're building high rise. It's very difficult when you build vertically and high to make things simpler. But where we can, we should. And this is a difficult conversation for industry. So we're actually saying in one breath, we're going, let's go high tech, more and more and more. And now we're saying, let's go low tech. Let's have a simple phone. Let's have a building with just manually open and shut windows without anything smart. You know, let's use shading, and it's a complicated trade-off. And again, this is where, as Pascal and other colleagues have been talking about, we need much more research to make those choices. Do we go simple? Do we go complex? Do we use critical materials? Do we not? Do we? And again, with the design for disassembly in the Act is fantastic. That helps us a lot to make those choices. But remanufacturing has to be. Remanufacturing slows down the rate of demand. It's the rate of demand that is the problem. Remember, the Critical Materials Act is there because we are looking at 5 to 6 times the demand than supply. We're just going to shut down European completely if we can't supply these materials. So slowing down is a smart move.
Thank you, David. So, okay, we have 10 minutes for questions from the audience. I have checked the chat, and I think that most of the questions have already been responded. But here I have a one from Kevin Considine, which is eco-modulation an effective tool for facilitating change? The evidence would suggest that it is not. The focus for sustainable design and subsequent recovery is better focused on eco-design, ESPR. I don't know who wants to respond to this.
Well, I would agree. I mean, I was talking about eco-design, and it's connected with the Critical Materials Act. And again, I said that's the work of the Joint Research Council in the European Commission. I've been very carefully looking at this. I'm quite impressed with their work, I must be honest. There is one topic I would raise, and maybe this is what the question was around: tensions and paradoxes in the requirements of eco-design in relation to critical materials. I'm currently writing a paper with Julia Lapko in Politecnico di Milano on paradoxes and tensions around critical materials and eco-design. There is a lot in there where it says do this, and we need to do that, and they're just pulling apart. So that could be a discussion. Again, we need more research on this.
Okay. Pascal, do you also want to respond to this question?
Yes, we researched eco-modulation 2 years ago in a multi-stakeholder platform. And when we undertook that research, we were, let's say, neutral. But after 1.5 years, we came to the conclusion that eco-modulation was not an effective market transformation tool. One of the reasons is that there are so many parameters and so many conditions that need to be complied with to make it effective. For example, we have to make sure that all the member states are using the same number of products that they apply the eco-modulation to, and you know, there are many things related to harmonization. And in addition, the waste directive, for example, does not allow for eco-modulation. I mean, it actually requires eco-modulation to be proportionate to the costs. And that's the core of the problem. So you cannot modulate more than the costs that you're facing. And we should also notice that in the sector, for example, of household appliances, lots of progress has already been made. For example, in terms of the energy efficiency of appliances and the use of hazardous substances. So the scope for improvement in the household appliance industry is much smaller than 20 years ago.
Thank you, Pascal. So here I have another question. What is the capacity of secondary materials to sustain the energy transition in Europe? The current capacity of secondary materials. Anyone wants to respond to this? David, Pascal?
Sorry,
Ricardo?
say again. I missed the question. Just what
Yeah,
is the
what is the current capacity of secondary materials to sustain the energy transition in Europe?
Yeah, that's a good
I don't
question.
think it's really big.
No, the short answer, and I think I covered it in my presentation, is, and you saw I think I touched on a heat map really quickly. This has been done over and over and over again, and Pascal's more of an expert on this than me, but it's insufficient. There's no way we can meet current demand with recycling. The argument, if you heard my argument, and Pascal and I agree on this, there's two things in a circular thing. One is product, well, actually it's three. One is not using something at all, it's refused, and you were talking about that just now. Secondly, once we get into product life extension strategies, it's slowing down the rate. But this sometimes gets misunderstood in that product life extension strategies are closing the material loop. No, they're not. There is only one strategy that closes the material loop, and that's recycling. That brings material back into the process again. Product life extension is just using stuff for longer, effectively, using it over and over again in different ways. The two needs to be put together, and this is one of the struggles that Pascal and I and many other colleagues have had over the years, is to stop this debate about it's recycling or other strategies. I'm like, no, we need everything together. We need coordination and harmonization, and it's about the flows of stuff through society and through industries. I'll let Pascal say more.
Yeah, let's say I agree with what you said, Dave. Europe is is very advanced in terms of recycling electrical and electronic waste, and also in terms of, for example, 55% is formally collected and properly recycled. The global average is less than 18%. So, but the thing is that if you look at the critical raw materials, and Maria Newberg mentioned one of them in her presentation, they are much, much lower. So copper, for example, is 55%, the end-of-life recycling input rate. So that's the extent to which recycled materials are used in the production. That's 55% for copper, so it's very substantial. But for example, cobalt is 22%, which is good, but many rare earth elements such as germanium and manganese and nickel and so on, they are just at 1, 2, 3%. And so there's a huge scope for, there's a huge potential actually to start recovering these critical raw materials. And it's really a huge challenge. And one of the reasons why recycling is not enough is that these critical raw materials are now sitting in products that have not reached their end of life yet. So the materials in a wind turbine are not available for production because they are sitting in a wind turbine, and it will take another 10, 15, 20 years before that wind turbine is recycled. And secondly, the population grows as well. So these are two fundamental, and then there's a stock as Dave showed, there's everything that is in the built stock that will be sitting there for another few decades or centuries even.
Yeah, I would just add as well, and I think, Pascal, you're alluding to this, we are undergoing a massive energy transition away from fossil fuels. That requires energy generation technologies, building changes, grids, infrastructure, digital, and it's all going to be built. So we're like, oh, it's all built already, isn't it? We've got an electricity grid. No, nowhere near big enough. It needs to be rebuilt again and again over to transmit the amount of power, including all the systems as well that we need that are not fossil fuel dependent, mobility, heating, cooling, digital, all these systems require the power. This has all got to be built, and it will be built over the coming years. But as Pascal said, once you've sourced the raw materials, built these systems, they then have a residence time before they're ready for recycling. That's the catch-22. You need the materials while you're building it. So we can't be building something, using it for 6 months, taking it apart to recycle it to get more materials. It's a catch-22. So that's the real challenge that we face. How do we secure our materials for the transition in the short term? And that's why I used, to conclude on this, that it's not a tech problem, it's a time problem. The timing is the problem. And that's, in a way, a big challenge, but it's also a good challenge because time we can manage. We can't stop time, but we can choose how we use time and how we use stuff. And I think that's where we get an opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's 11:30. I have one final question from the audience, and is regarding the export of waste from Europe to other countries, China or US. So if we are aiming to increase our recycling rates in Europe, how to effectively stop these exports to other countries?
I could say a few words on that, but Pascal, again, I think will know. It's transboundary shipment of waste, and this has been a perennial global problem for a long time. There's a thing, Basel agreements and other agreements around the world, which are saying we should not export waste. That we should control the export of waste. The other risk, though, we have with that, if we do it in a clumsy way, we can't move product around for product life extension strategies or for recycling. So we've got to be careful how we do it, that we don't try and solve one problem and create new problems. And this is, I think, the wickedness of this challenge. But Pascal, maybe you've got some thoughts on this.
Maybe listen to Ricardo.
Thank you very much. So basically, when it comes to exporting waste, what is the opinion of European recyclers is that we agree that unprocessed waste should be subject or, to restrictions. But when it comes to processed waste that meet industry specifications, this waste should be allowed to be traded freely in international markets. Now, how we increase the demand at the European level, I think, it's what I said earlier. So, for example, if in different legislative files, the European Commission, together with the co-legislators, of course, will start setting targets to increase the demand of secondary raw materials, I think also European recyclers will be more than happy to keep these materials within the Union, because from discussions that we had also internally, when it comes to exporting waste, you also have some other problems. So if they had to choose between shipping, the materials from, I don't know, Germany to France, that would be a preferred option, that shipping those materials from Germany, for example, to a country that is located outside of the Union.
Okay, I think David has also a comment. Yeah.
One, very quickly, in my presentation, I said, with the support of EIT Raw Materials, we have developed a free online course. I put the link in the chat. So if anyone hadn't seen it, it's there. It's open now. You can join. It's free. You can dip in and out and learn all you'd like to know about critical materials.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think we have reached the end of the webinar. I would like to thank all the speakers. I would like to thank Pascal, David, Ricardo, Cecilia, Maria, Michael, for your participation in this webinar. I really hope you think it was an interesting option to you to be with us this 1.5 hours. I also would like to thank all our participants online. I have checked, and we have had around 80 participants during the online webinar. Just to inform all of you that all the presentations and the recorded webinar will be available in the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform website. So the information will be there for you